Neurolaw by Judith Flores. You probably have heard that the brain weighs only 3 pounds, but did you know, according to brainfacts.org, that more than 1,000 disorders of the brain and nervous system results in more hospitalizations than any other disease group, including heart disease and cancer? After my speech, you should be able to see the reasons why Neurolaw centers are not ready to be established yet. Neurolaw must walk a careful line of caution by continuing to rely on the information of neuroscience for information purposes only, therefore not using it as an external validation tool to determine if a person is guilty or innocent. First, I will describe the two major concepts related to neurolaw. Second, I will demonstrate how without sufficient information of the brain, neurolaw centers can affect the U.S. justice system. And finally, I will give some advice on what we need to do to prevent it from occurring prematurely. The recent research concerned with neuroimaging and efforts to understand the brain continues. The law should not be modified with the current insufficient information at hand. Two concepts that are not commonly found together are making their way into the justice system, and they need to be understood. One of them is criminal responsibility. This is the concept that is used in law to determine how a person who committed a crime is liable and how they should be punished as a consequence. In the article of Nicole A. Vincent from 2010, she explains that criminal responsibility is, quote, more of a syndrome of concepts than it is a single unitary or generic concept, end quote. That means that it is a complex concept to pinpoint. The other one is neuroscience. You see, this is an effective tool being used to diagnose what goes on in a person's brain. Here's a graph published on Vincent's article that demonstrates how, in the field of science, ongoing research on the brain continues to prove that not all has been discovered. You see, there are different techniques that are being used in neuroscience to test the brain to observe, measure, or modify it. The brain is more complex than we know, therefore making it difficult for us to try to pinpoint how it works as well. I have just informed you on the two main concepts that you can recognize when you're speaking about neurolaw. Now let us take a look at why it needs to be limited. As useful as this new knowledge of the brain is, it should have limitations when it comes to using it in the justice system, due to the abuse of power some would use. As neuroscience meets law, it needs boundaries. The reason for boundaries is to protect society, hold legal counsel accountable, and keep the law from being modified. An article by Daniel Payares Dominguez and Elsa Gonzalez Esteban from 2016 gives some examples of how neuroscience is being used in the justice system. They state that to medicate criminals to keep them from committing future crimes, for example, rapists and sex offenders receive long-acting forms of anti-androgen medication. Or cases such as Herring versus Iowa used brain fingerprinting in the case, impacting the results. Limitations are vital to protect. For example, jurors need to be protected from misrepresentation of neuroscientific evidence that may be used in the court system to validate a person's crime. Or judges and attorneys, any legal counsel involved need to have ethical standards be put in place for neurolaw use. And they also need to be cautious of the influence it can have in criminal cases. Balance is key for successful results. The question here is not if we have the power to find and treat an individual with a mental disease, because thanks to advancing technology, we do. Rather, the question is, what do we do with the information that we have currently of neuroscience? And how do we limit this information in a way that it will not jeopardize current definition of the law? This question can only be answered as we cautiously gather more information about how neuroscience can help in the justice system. You see, science cannot use its power of knowledge to change the law. It simply needs to be used for what it is, a great source of information. Now that you have seen how limiting neuroscience in the field of law can help bring balance to neurolaw, I will give you some advice on what we can do to prevent it from occurring prematurely. The argument is not that we should dismiss neuroscience from the courtrooms, but implement limitations on how it should be used as evidence, therefore avoiding its use as an excuse rather than for legal mitigation of a case. Science is known to be a tangible thing that people can see and prove that it is real. However, when it comes to the law, the tangible fact of science must be used with caution due to the fact that the law deals with people's behaviors, internal beings of a person, such as conscience, not organs such as a brain. In the article written by Gerben Mayen from 2014, he states that, quote, a conceptual gap exists between the brain on the one hand and the concepts the law is ultimately interested in, like knowledge, lying, deciding, and deceiving on the other. These concepts concern capacities of persons, not their brains, end quote. The gap between neuroscience information of the brain and the law need to continue to grow closer so that neurolaw is not introduced prematurely, causing challenges to the current justice system, and that its use in the court is protected by ethical standards that are put in place to stop any abuse of power. The reason we are not ready is because it is important to continue researching and remain up to date on this issue by allowing experts from both sides of these fields to continue to work together until there can be sufficient research that will help bring solutions to the courtrooms. Furthermore, as of right now, the knowledge of neurolaw is in a baby stage of growth, and it should be handled with patience and care before implementing centers in our justice system.